One of the most well-known sayings given by Christ to his disciples is in the book of Matthew, chapter 19, verse 24, where he says, I say it again, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. This is in response to a question given to Christ by a rich man on the road to Jericho. Debate about the meaning of this has been rife for years, and many scholars say there was a small door in the main gates of Jerusalem, which remained open after the main gates were closed for the night. The only way a merchant, arriving after dark, could get his camel load through was by offloading his wares and stooping the camel through the gate. Quite apart from the fact that he can reclaim his wealth easily on the other side, there is little evidence that such a gate existed. So, whilst it's still hotly debated among some Christian circles, this likely means that Jesus meant it literally, using an actual camel and an actual needle. Considering how big camels are and how small needles are, and I've got one right here to show you, getting a big camel through the eye of a needle seems almost impossible. But my mind works in a somewhat weird way. Not only did I question it, but I started wondering, can it be possible? So after, just over 7 weeks of lockdown, my mind has gone over this. And whilst it may seem mad, I think I found out the answer. You can put the camel in the eye of a needle. And, well, thought I may as well share it with you and explain what I came up with. To set some rules first of all I have is one needle and one camel. The rules are, I can get things for the project and pay for them afterwards, but it has to be simple and cheap, and I have to repay. The end goal is to get the camel from one side of the needle to the other via the eye of the needle and have no debt to pay at the end of the process. In terms of setting, we want to be near a freezer. For the sake of being practical and not playing the rules about only starting with a camel and a needle, let's imagine we're doing this next to a frozen lake in the dead of an Arctic winter. So this also means we don't want to hang around too long. For the sake of safety, we're also living in a shelter, and we will have some running water nearby. That's the only concession we will have in this. The camel will be a female dromedary, standing at about 6 feet at the shoulder and weighing just less than 540 kilos. A typical camel of the time, and one that might have been seen most days by the people of Jericho. Now, I have seen a game show where people were given a toy camel and told to push it through the smallest gap possible. But we are using, in this experiment, a real-life camel. Hypothetically, for the sake of the vegans. Because I'm pretty sure Jesus would have used an actual camel as well. The needle will be a darner's needle, a size 16, with a diameter of about 1.63 millimeters. Since these were common folk and Jesus was raised in a carpenter's household, darning would have been well known to them. My research couldn't bring up the size of the eye of the needle, But these are long-eyed needles, and they are not easy to thread if you're like me and don't have any coordination. Modern needles can vary in diameter from 2.34 to less than a quarter of a millimeter. But I'm not sure that thread would have been that fine back in Jesus' time. So for the sake of the experiment, that darning needle size will have to do. So we have our camel, we have our needle, and we have our goal. What do we do first? Well, since we're pushing a whole camel with the eye of a needle, and that's impossible, I'm afraid we're going to take what I refer to as the Hugh Dennis route. We have to spatchcock the camel. For the sake of the experiment, and for the sake of the vegans again, Alice has been put down humanely before we got there. And since she's hypothetical, she wouldn't have felt any pain whatsoever. For this I'm going to need a butcher's knife, preferably one that can cut meat into sellable slices. For convenience, a knife that can do all the jobs needed in the butchering process. Many camp or bushcraft knives can fill this role quite happily. My penknife might be useful, but I think a proper camp knife would do the job nicely. So, we're going to have to skin the camel, gut it, remove the sinews, and butcher the meat. So we've got in its neat little forms. They're not going to fit through the eye of the needle on their own. No, we need to push forward as well. We need to process them. That requires equipment we currently don't have and need to buy. So, we need to sell parts of the camel. Camel meat has a broad ranging price, so Alice's meat can get you anything from $162 all the way up to $1,500 and maybe a bit more. Now, this gives us quite a broad budget, and there are many products that we can buy to help us with this. But first of all, we're going to need some buckets to keep the meat, blood, fat, and organs in, as well as a drying rack for the skin. We're going to also need a funnel for reasons that will become obvious later. And most importantly, we're going to need a blender. I will admit, when I first thought of this experiment, I was imagining a Top Gear style blender, V8 powered, and with all the equipment needed. But in this case, we're just going to go for a common blender that we can buy on the market. Now, we can grind the meat straight away, but to have the best chance of success, we need to get it as fine as possible. I found the best way to do this, after extensive research, is to cut up the meat into a finer slice as possible, and then we freeze it. Hence why we need a freezer, or indeed a frozen lake. Freezing it helps to break it down even further. It might be worthwhile doing the same with the bones, to help with a later action with those once the marrow's been removed, obviously. Whilst that is freezing, we need to focus on the rest of the camel, as we're not going to leave any of it behind, if at all possible. Having already skinned the camel, to get the meat off, we need to remove the hairs. Some sources say you soak it in the right solution of lime or even lye. You can get the hairs to dissolve, but I want to use the hairs for something, and I don't want to buy more stuff than is needed. So the hide can just be soaked in water, hung up, and scraped down to get the hairs, which we will collect and put to one side. When that is done and the hide is dry, we make a tanning solution using the brain of the camel. In quite a few animals, the brain is just big enough to make a perfect size tanning mixture if you mix it with water and possibly some fat. So once we made the tanning mixture, we can scrape it onto the hide again, and that will make it nice and supple. This is when you slice it into as thin strips as possible. The thinner, the better. The hairs we want to make into yarn. Now, yarn is more often used with wool, and I've done a bit of carding and spinning with wool, but most animal fur can be used in the same way. As long as we card it and spin it into the tightest threads possible, we can use them in all manner of things. I've heard of some people using dog hair, for example, to make lovely woolly jumpers, and horsehair jumpers were used back in the day for penitent priests and monks. To save on buying carders and a drop spindle, I personally use teasels, which are out of a thistle, and I would hand spin the yarn. That would save a lot of money, and I actually find I do a bit better with hand spinning. Shows that this can build up all manner of skills. The bones need to be broken up into small pieces and need to be ground down using the blender if you want. So I personally used a couple of rocks. There are a number of ways you can process the bones to make this quicker and easier, including boiling and drying them over a period of weeks. Ultimately, we want a nice, fine powder out of them. So once we've got that side, the meat should be thoroughly frozen, and this too can be added to the blender and made into a finer paste as possible, along with the organs, and mixing with blood should make it a lot finer and thinner, and if you need to add a bit of water to it, that is perfectly fine. You've got the spring there, we may as well use it. All that, and none of it has gone anywhere near the needle. But now is the time. Time to get the camel through the needle. Personally, I would start by pouring the fine bone needle through the thumb, hence we had the thumb in the first place, and through the eye of the needle. Then we'd start with the meat and blood puree. That'll get poured through as well. This is then followed by the sinew, rawhide, and yarn, all of which can be used to clean out the containers of any remaining bits. And once the last of thread is through, there we have it. You have done it. You've beaten the odds. You've got a camel through the eye of a needle. Except a lot of people will say it isn't. All I've got is just a pile of powdered bones, some sticky yarn, rawhide and sinew, and a bucket of sloppy camel puree. Unless you are a hardcore vegan activist who was forced to watch the process, tied to a chair whilst eyeing the knife and imagining what they want to do with it. It's very unlikely you would say it's a camel. Even assuming you are that committed to the camel, you'd quite possibly say there isn't much of the camel that got through. Some of it had to be sold to get the items that were needed. And since we can't buy them back, as they need to go through the needle as well, those with the camel were not getting back. For a rough budget worked out, we could have spent about £50 minimum on the items that we had. And if we want to bulk up the items to really go through the process, we could quite happily spend around £100 if we wanted to. But even with that, we'd still end up with about 98% of the camel coming through. 98% of the camel is still missing a couple of percent of the camel. So, quite apart from smashing the word of Christ about rich men being unable to enter the kingdom of God, what else have we learned? Well, since the camel isn't really a camel anymore, I mean, it doesn't really have any legs to stand on, we can't really carry on as though the camel is there. It's not. The rich man has to change along with his wealth. If we look at what we have left over, we see we have a bucket of rich red meat that can be made into a hearty soup and given to people who need to eat. We've got a bucket of bone meal that can help fertilize a garden, that can make it pretty with flowers or fill it with vegetables. We have sinew and rawhide that can bind things together, help build stuff, and make all manner of wonderful structures. We also have some yarn that can be used for knitting, that can be used for sewing things together, or mending stuff. So we are using a camel in completely unexpected ways. When you look at a camel in the desert, you normally think, that's a camel. It doesn't need much water. It can walk for long distances. And it's an absolute pain in Australia. That's why I'm using a dromedary. Let's assume it's an Australian camel. It can be used to carry immensely heavy loads and all manner of stuff. But when we break it down into its component parts, as we've done here, it can be used in more ways than we can ever imagine. Just because when one person wins the lottery, their quadruple rollover, they will end up with, say, several £1 million just because they're going to buy Bugatti Veyron and move to Florida. Doesn't mean that's what you have to do if you win the rollover. If you had all that money, you could give it to so many people. You can spread it out. You can give to charities. You take a activist celebrity like Maisie Williams, for example. She's around about my age, and she knows how to use her money wisely. She's built up apps and groups that will help people find their talents. She gives to wildlife charities, and she gives to her parents as well. She is very much, you could say, a model celebrity, one that many celebrities should, and quite often do, aspire to be. It is wonderful. So using all that money, using all that rich, we have an awful lot at the end of the process. Before we go much further, I am going to mention something. I found all manner of alternative views on this topic. Some scholars say that the word camel was actually a misspelling. Instead of the word camelos, which does mean camel, it should have been camilos, which means rope or cable. That is an interesting thing, because anyone who does rope making or has made cordage, for example, knows that big ropes are made of lots of smaller fibres, as you can see here, twisted again and again to bind them tightly together. Once that's done, you can bind more of them together into thicker and stronger ropes. Another useful lesson to learn later on. But strangely enough, it was this sort of principle I was working on with this experiment. But I felt going the whole hog with the camel would explain it a bit better. Because a camel, even though we had to use a hypothetical one to avoid getting lynched by angry vegans and the RSPCA, again, is a living being. And us as living beings can go through such incredible amounts of change in our lives. When people turn to Jesus, they can change in ways few people can understand, and can be forever changed. They can be forever different. When I went to Soul Survivor for the first time, many years ago, my youth leader, who was a good friend of mine, asked me at the end of the festival if I was the same person who arrived there. I honestly had no idea. That shows how powerful God can be. If we go back to the process of what we did to the camel, we first stripped it back to its base components. We peeled back its skin, peeled back its fat, and cut it down, opening up its insides, revealing all. That camel was naked, stripped back, and broken down. God does this to us all the time. And yet, whilst we may feel scattered and stretched all over the place, and processed through all manner of torturous occasions, thrust into cold water, doused in all manner of stuff, ground up, broken down, and forced through unbelievably tight circumstances, on the other side, we can still be a force for good, an incredibly good one. Saul was changed from a persecutor of Christians to a great preacher and zealot of the same, writing letters to the Romans, the Corinthians, and the Galatians, amongst many others, and travelling many miles following God's will. This thought experiment is a gruesome prospect, and I had to put the essay on hold for a bit when a friend announced that she had cut her hand doing the washing up, things you do in lockdown, and she was panicking a bit because of it. But it shows that turning to Jesus, whilst it can expose you for who you are as a being, it can change you into a better person. Something you can't imagine until it actually happens. The process may be harrowing, but it can give you a new perspective on things, teach you things you may never have understood otherwise, and can leave you something completely different on the other side. Through this process, for example, I learned how to butcher an animal if I ever needed to. You never know, if this lockdown carries on for any longer, might be an apocalypse, and we may have to survive the fall of civilization. So learning to skin a deer is a good idea. Granted, throughout this process you may have to ask people for help. You may have to give things up and give things away to make it through. You may have to say goodbye to certain things that are part of you, never to see them again. And you may end up doing things you never thought you would do. But all those little things that you lose in the process, all of that, you gain in ways you can only imagine on the other side. I always say that Christianity isn't the easiest path. They can teach you so much more. It is quite scary, but wonderful at the same time. This can be a bit tricky to reconcile. The fear of one thing, and then turning it into love. Is this the trauma of something making you love something at the end? Or is it Stockholm Syndrome, you're loving your torturer? That is the topic of next week's video. Stay tuned for that, as well as other videos that will help you find out how to go through the blender of faith, as I like to think of it. To help you along with that, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the notification bell to stay up to date with the videos. I'm also on Facebook, Warrior Pilgrim. I'll try to put the link in the description. This video and others in the later series will be in a playlist that I'm putting together this week. Please give this video a thumbs up. It is slightly graphic, yes, but if you want to share with your friends, even if it's just to wind up the vegans or the animal activists, by all means do so. It'll be fun. Leave any suggestions for future videos in the comments below, as well as any scriptures you think I need to follow. And until next week's video, stay safe, don't cut your hands doing washing up, and God be with you, my friends.